Welcome everyone. This is the first episode of EXMOnline Presents Hero History. I'm Reed Lamons.
Peter Bogdan.
Patrick Lee.
And each week we're going to be coming to you guys to talk to about a certain superhero or villain or any particular popular character in the comic books universe to give an overview of their history and our opinions on them. A lot of people know about Batman and Superman, but not many people know about characters such as Iron Fist or maybe even Rye from the Valiant universe. So, we're here to fill you guys in on our opinions and lots of facts about the superhero beyond just their superpower. We're going to bring you guys a different perspective from each of us. For instance, this week, I know particularly a lot about Daredevil, at least I would think for most people. Patrick has a lot of experience with the character and reading various comics or TV shows. And Peter has only just seen the Daredevil TV show on Netflix. And this will give everyone a good idea of what various types of people think about the character and interesting perspectives on him or her. So, let's start off. What do you guys think about Daredevil?
Street level hero, pretty gritty even for Marvel standards. Yeah, I mean, you saw the recent Netflix show.
Yeah, and it was my first really introduction to the character, and I think it was really interesting, and it was interesting to see Marvel. They're trying something new. They're trying to get a new audience.
Similarities to Batman, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love the show. I think it's, even if you were not a comics fan and you just found it on Netflix, it's the show that people are even still liking there.
Definitely. It's definitely, I mean, it's breaking records.
Yeah.
People are loving it.
So, they obviously hit it out of the park, and we're sure to see more great stuff from Marvel when they continue to put stuff out on Netflix. But as for Daredevil himself, everyone wants more, particularly of Daredevil, and we'll see next season. And I think they nailed some of Daredevil's themes wonderfully in the TV show. Particularly, Daredevil is a superhero known for having this constant debate in his head about religion. And unlike many superheroes, there's always been a focus on Matt Murdock's Catholicism throughout Daredevil, and he's always got this balance of, good versus evil and weighting it against God. That and Matt Murdock being a lawyer and having this, contrasting personality of someone in the higher echelon of society, similar to Bruce Wayne being a billionaire philanthropist. Matt Murdock is a, defense attorney for the people.
But I think kind of an interesting point of that is, from someone who's only seen the show, he is not a very successful lawyer. He's working at an office, getting started. They have poor clientele. I mean, they're taking on jobs basically for the credit to keep, getting higher and higher. But in the beginning, we're seeing him at the lowest.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he really builds himself up versus being handed a fortune, right?
Absolutely, because they even said we were offered really good jobs at one law firm. We wanted to be for the people and help them. And so I think that's a really cool aspect that you don't see with Batman.
Right. For those of us who haven't read too many of the comics, just how high up does he rise as like a lawyer? Because he sticks with like the Nelson and Murdoch.
Yeah.
Right.
Throughout his career, he fluctuates in his success. For the most part, Nelson and Murdoch become a highly acclaimed attorney. He's able to use a lot of his Daredevil powers to help them solve cases and build that repertoire. But at times he becomes disbarred. He loses the trust of Foggy Nelson, and their firm kind of falls apart. In the recent Mark Waid line, he even he loses his license, and they end up having to sort of create a go-around for that by becoming legal consultants for people needing representation but can't afford it, so they train people in how to defend themselves in a court of law.
Okay.
So he's been at varying levels of success in his attorney profession, yet he's always been helping the people through it. He's never ever stepped into like being a cutthroat corporate attorney. That's never been
right. Like in the show, especially with the whole they're both he and his partner Foggy are like blood and bones, just residents of Hell's Kitchen, and so they really read as like the small like mom and pop store of attorneys in Hell's Kitchen. So I was just wondering how, not necessarily corporate, but how big they get. So.
I did enjoy that they actually did show a huge conflict between Foggy and Matt early in this, or not immediately early in the season, but in this first season.
Right.
Because though the characters are historically best friends and will kind of always be this best friend dynamic, they do have falling outs throughout the comics. They do have conflicts, and Foggy, being one of the few people who knows about Matt Murdock's secret, has always been an interesting dynamic, and I think he's a character that has a much different treatment than a lot of, characters who know of the superhero's identity, right?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the time they are always in threat of being caught, or they're, the romantic interest, the damsel in distress type of thing, and Foggy creates a much different dynamic with this. But we do also see the character of Karen Page being a similar representation of like that kind of trope in comics.
And so I've never actually read a comic with Karen Page in it, unless it was when I was like 4th grade or something. And so I've heard from you before how she kind of has some crazy like things happen to her. But yeah, just out of curiosity, like how did they handle her character as far as being introduced this season? Like, as far as how that relates to Daredevil, I suppose. Like,
yeah. I'm kind of curious, like, what do you think about Karen Page first before I spoil anything?
What do I think? Karen Page, she's fine. She was there. It gave a little bit of a love triangle aspect that maybe I'm bringing into a little much, but it definitely seems like that's where they're headed, and that worries me a little bit. It's kind of generic and cliche. But at the same time, they do characterize her as a strong woman with her own ideals, and she's looking to, better herself and help them in the law firm. So that was well done. We'll have to see where it goes.
I had a similar thought process, and the only thing I thought they kind of drove home her fanaticism over solving this mystery a little bit hard in some episodes, but it does look like they're going to take the same direction as many of the comics. Karen Page is a constant romantic interest for Matt Murdock and Daredevil throughout all the comics. And yes, she goes through some very, very dark stuff. And considering that the show is vastly based off of Frank Miller's Daredevil, I'm curious to see how far they take Karen Page, because in the comics, one of the most famous storylines, Daredevil's Born Again, by Frank Miller, Karen Page, who has long become disassociated with Foggy and Matt, and has long gone off, done her own thing, she turns up as a drug-addicted prostitute who ends up selling Daredevil's identity for heroin money.
Safe to assume they won't be doing that.
Yeah, and that ends up to the information being sold to Kingpin, and Kingpin ruining Matt Murdock and destroying his life, getting him disbarred, taking all of his money. It creates an incredible story.
I kind of want to see that story actually unfold. That's a good story.
It is an incredible story, but I don't think they will take Karen Page, the character, that far in Marvel TV.
No. I feel like the show has pushed the bar of what Marvel's willing to show. Yeah. There is a sequence where Kingpin brutally murders someone by slamming their head till it is in pieces. That's disgusting. But I do not think that they are going to get to a point where one of the main female characters is a prostitute.
I mean, probably not. And I feel like they wouldn't necessarily shy away from it. What I don't like about it is, I haven't read the comic, I don't know the full context, it just seems unnecessary. I feel like they could tell that story without that.
I feel they will. I feel like we'll get a 3rd or 4th season with Kingpin returning, receiving that information, and doing it. With Karen Page, maybe in some sort of way have falling out with Foggy and Matt for some reason, but I don't think she will end up as the drug-riddled character. So, as we know, Daredevil's powers come down to simply him having super senses. He was blinded as a kid by radioactive chemicals, but he has super senses to everything else. Super hearing, super taste, super feel, everything.
He does have advanced fighting, which you can consider some maybe more of a trait, but it is in his repertoire of skills.
Which he earned from basically being mentored by a character called the Stick.
Correct, and we see a little of that in the show, but not a ton of him.
Yeah, but as for superheroes, he doesn't have a lot of incredible superpowers. So what do you guys think of that?
Well, I'm a big Batman guy, and so I like non-powered heroes. I think it brings or in this case, he has minor powers, but I think it brings a dynamic you don't always get. Superman has every power, so he can do many things. With the singular power and the limited ability of what he can do, I think it brings a human dynamic to the character.
Yeah. And I think it grounds it closer to their secret identity, too. When you think about Superman and Clark Kent, they're so far apart, it's sometimes hard to even think of them as counterparts. But when you have a character like Matt Murdock and Daredevil, they're still people. They're still, they still have the same senses, the same things. It's just when Matt Murdock is Daredevil, he's got a costume on and he's using his martial arts, but nothing has necessarily changed but how he uses his senses and how he goes about being himself.
What do you think, Patrick?
I really like that, especially in how the show depicted how vulnerable he is physically. Like, he is always getting sliced and diced. They drop a line about, he practices meditation so that he heals a little faster. Mm-hmm. It's not a superpower. Maybe he gets up and going an hour sooner than another person would. But it's just great, knowing that this character could conceivably die in the story world they've outlined. Like, we know he's not going to. The show's named after him. But we get a true sense of his mortality. And
going off on that as well, Rosario Dawson portrays a doctor on the show, and she's constantly healing him. I believe there's at least 5 scenes where she's stitching up knife wounds, getting bullets out, etc.
So knows how many between
and how many exactly? They're showing 5 scenes. It's dozens of scenes. She talks continuously about how he needs to stop this. He's gonna die.
I think one of the coolest things this type of character creates, this type of superhero, is that you get a much more interesting rogues gallery than you do in several other heroes, because he doesn't have tons of super villains either. Yes, some of the villains I assume he will face will have interesting powers. For instance, Bullseye, who has not made an appearance in the television show yet, can turn anything into a precision killing weapon.
Oh yeah, he's the MacGyver of the series.
Yes, he can take a paperclip and shoot it through your head if he so chooses. That's this interesting power. And he's the villain who ends up killing the character of Elektra later on, who is this other love interest.
With a paperclip?
No, not with a paperclip, but so that's sort of interesting. But otherwise, you get stuff like Kingpin or The Hand. This we kind of saw on the television show. The Hand is this ninja organization that, if you guys saw the TV show and remember the Yakuza leader who Daredevil fought and who was dressed all in red, that is The Hand. They all dress in that red ninja suit.
And they're discussed as well, periodically, but I believe that's the only time we actually see any indication that they're real.
But I have a huge suspicion that that's going to be season 2, is that killing that Yakuza leader is going to come back. They are going to hunt down the man who killed that leader, so we're going to get more of The Hand. Particularly because the character of Stick, who is this mentor who came back, is part of another ninja clan that fights The Hand, right? And Daredevil has this interesting dynamic with ninjas that you think would be ridiculous. You don't see ninjas too often in comics unless they're about ninjas.
Wolverine.
That is true. Wolverine does have a lot of Japanese mythos to it, too. But Daredevil has this weird dynamic where he's constantly fighting a ninja clan. And that'll be interesting to see how willing they are to get into, Japanese mythos and ninjas and samurai and all this kind of stuff.
Seemed pretty willing. I was actually surprised. There was a guy in red pajamas fighting Daredevil. He eventually wears his own red pajamas, but they went full on with the ninja thing and they lampshaded it a bit. I think he said to Foggy in an episode, he's some kind of ninja.
Yeah, it's full on pajama party.
Yeah.
That opens the potential for Elektra to show up too.
Yeah, I mean,
you have your own theories on Elektra. I know
the internet has its own theories, which is that I subscribe to. That I subscribe to the internet and its theories. That Elektra was mentioned this season because there's a passing reference to a Greek ex-girlfriend from law school, which is Elektra in the comics. So.
Oh, I definitely feel like that reference. Obviously, they're hinting she's coming, but with the samurai and Japanese ninja reference, that came out weird. That is also an indication that Elektra will be coming and having a large part.
Yeah.
If I were to take large speculative guesses, I would see like season 2 will have the ninjas. Elektra might show up. It will have Karen Page fall out. Season 3 will be he develops a relationship with Elektra. She might die at the end of it. Season 4 will bring back the Kingpin. That Karen Page will come back to haunt them, and we'll get something like Born Again. That's lots of speculation, but as a comic book reader and understanding a lot of the stories and what it's basing itself off of, I could see that being like the next 4 seasons of Daredevil.
So, what is Elektra's powers? Is she just
she's a trained ninja.
She's just a trained ninja.
She's a trained ninja who has a past with Daredevil, and she uses scythe weapons.
Yeah.
That's about her only thing. I believe they give her some more supernatural powers. Don't quote me on that yet. But after she comes back to life after being killed by Bullseye, I believe she gets a couple more powers.
Yeah, originally she is just like a highly trained ninja, like the Yakuza leader.
And what's going off of that, that's pretty cool because that goes back to the grounded aspect. The villains are mostly villains because they are top tier mobsters. Not many of them were shown to have any sort of powers.
Right, and it was exceptional. Even that ninja was exceptional.
Yeah,
because he beat the hell out of Daredevil.
Yeah,
so.
A Kingpin, his power is brute force and size. I mean, that's really it. It's wealth, criminal connections, and just brute force.
Yep.
And
some of the best stories about Daredevil were from authors who really understood how grounded the character can be and how emotional you can take some of the themes. We've talked about religion already, but I think one of my other favorite themes with Daredevil is duality.
Okay.
There's always been this discussion with superheroes on duality, right? Because they have one identity as a superhero, one identity as some normal citizen in society, right? But Daredevil has had so many bizarre stories in duality where he's faked his death and he's become like Mike Murdock, and he's pretended to, commit suicide or disappear, and he came back as Jack Batlin, a persona taken from his fallen father. He has dealt with impersonators pretending to be Daredevil, one of them being the man who would eventually become Iron Fist.
Oh, really?
Yep. I can't remember his name. Danny
Rand. Iron Fist.
Danny Rand.
Danny Rand, yes. Danny Rand actually impersonated Daredevil at one point in the comic books. And that's how they got to know each other, and eventually Danny Rand becomes Iron Fist.
That could be an interesting introduction in the Netflix show.
Yep. That's another thought that I'm thinking that they might do that, but we'll see. It did come out kind of during the time when like they're based in the comic stuff, like this Miller 80s era, so that's totally possible too. But I love the themes they take with his duality because they do a lot of things that not a lot of other superheroes have, and they have so many things where he's battling like which identity is his, and at some point he even is concerned like, does Matt Murdock even exist anymore, because he's become so attached to this like fake identity he's created after dying that he's not even sure like if Matt Murdock exists versus whether he's Daredevil or that. He just doesn't even know if like one of his real personalities exists anymore. So he's always been an interesting character psychologically. Alright, so on to a little bit of the crazier stuff Daredevil has done. Every comic book legend has some ridiculous stuff in their background. If they've been created, and they're going 30, 40 years ago at least. Yeah. I think some of my favorite stuff is back when Ann Nocenti wrote Daredevil. He got into fighting for animal rights, environmentalism, and feminism. It was very interesting, and maybe I shouldn't say this is necessarily crazy, but it was not something you saw a lot of ever in Daredevil's history, and it was really interesting to see all these different forms of like law and social rights be taken on by the superhero.
Would you even see that in many comics in general at the time?
Not at the time. I think nowadays you might see some social rights issues come out more in comics.
Yeah.
But at the time, it certainly wasn't too big, but it still happened.
But it was a anomaly for the most part.
Yeah, it was definitely different, and it would depend author to author. But it was super cool to see the only lawyer character that really existed back then take on all these different social rights issues. Daredevil has always been that kind of unique character where you can evaluate the law through this character, as he's, very varying on judge and jury and being a lawyer. So that's always been an interesting thing. I think that's some of the coolest, craziest stuff Daredevil really did, was just looking at the law in different ways.
Absolutely. And, we're starting to run out of time, so I think maybe we should give our opinions and overall thoughts on Daredevil. And
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, just tying in with what you were just saying about, like, his legal pursuits, I just love that this guy uses his powers as a lawyer. Like, he is a walking lie detector, and, like, he is a criminal defense attorney, and he knows when his clients are guilty or innocent. And that actually ties in with my personal, like, very formative, like, possibly favorite take on Daredevil before this Netflix series was a two-parter of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. And Peter Parker is on trial because the Kingpin, who's typically a Daredevil villain, is actually one of the main ongoing villains for 5 years of the Spider-Man show. And Peter Parker's on trial for, I believe, murder. I can't recall right now, actually. And Matt Murdock shows up as his criminal defense attorney. And it is an epic two-parter. Everybody should watch it. I mean, got to bear with 90s animation and voice acting, but highly recommended. Great take on Daredevil.
Nice. As I've said, I've only seen the show, and the show it's piqued my interest. I think I want to get some books. I'm gonna pick them up, and I'm excited for season 2.
Yeah.
I'm ready for more characters. I'm ready for more villains. I love Kingpin, and his take on him I thought was superb. So I'm ready for more of his ass whooping, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, if you're looking for more comics to get into Daredevil or something else, and if any of you are interested in following up and learning more about Daredevil, getting into any of the media he's part of, these would be at least my recommendations for getting into Daredevil. If you haven't seen the Netflix show, go see the Netflix show. It's probably a better starting point than most comics, to be quite honest, because it covers his origin, and it's an engrossing tale with phenomenal acting. If you're looking for books to get in, I would start with stuff like Frank Miller's Daredevil. He's acclaimed for writing Daredevil. His runs in the 80s and even, I think, in the early 90s are critically acclaimed. Look for The Man Without Fear or Born Again. If you want some of the crazy law stuff, go look at Ann Nesenti's run on Daredevil. And if you want more recent stuff, look for the Brian Michael Bendis' run. Is incredibly acclaimed, and that was the early 2000s. Or check out Mark Waid's run, which has been going on for the past 4 years or so. And that's just wrapping up, and that makes me sad, and why I'm not super interested in following Daredevil much coming up in the comic books, because Waid's run ends in 3 or 4 issues. But it is a great run, and you should check that out if you like modern comics. Anyway, thank you for joining us. This has been Hero History with Daredevil and the EXMOnline crew. Signing off, I'm Reed Lamons.
Peter Bogdan.
Patrick Lee.
You guys have a good night.
Cheers.